I am Allison, 32 years old, and I have been dreading this family meeting for months. My siblings always had a way of making me feel small with their subtle jabs about my modest lifestyle. Little did they know the company I built from scratch had just sold for millions. I chose to drive a 10-year-old car and live simply because possessions never defined me. Their judgment about my worth was about to change dramatically today. The helicopter was just the beginning of their education. Before I dive into this story, drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you have ever been underestimated by your family. Trust me, what happens next is something you will not want to miss. Growing up as the middle child between my older brother James and younger sister Stephanie was never easy. James, now 40, always embodied everything my parents valued. He followed the traditional path through an Ivy League college to a prestigious corporate executive position at a Fortune 500 company. His corner office in Manhattan and vacation home in the Hamptons were frequent topics at family gatherings. Stephanie, 28, took a different route to success by marrying Andrew Eyre to a regional banking fortune. Her picture-perfect wedding was featured in several local magazines, and her life of charity galas and country club memberships fulfilled my parents' dreams for their youngest daughter. Then there was me, Allison, the middle child, who never quite fit the mold, where James was calculated and traditional, and Stephanie was socially savvy and conventional. I was always questioning and seeking something different. My parents tried their best to provide equally for all three of us, but it became clear early on that my siblings and I had fundamentally different values. During high school, while James was student body president and Stephanie was homecoming queen, I was starting my first small business selling custom websites to local shops. My parents viewed it as a cute hobby that would eventually give way to a sensible career or marriage. When I announced I wanted to skip college to pursue entrepreneurship, the family reaction ranged from disappointment to outright intervention attempts. "You will regret this decision for the rest of your life," my father had said, refusing to make eye contact during that tense dinner 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I left our hometown of Cedar Springs with just $200 in my pocket and a determination to prove my path was valid. My family predicted I would be back within 6 months, humbled and ready to accept their version of success. When I did not return, they created their own narrative. That I was struggling but too proud to admit it, that my business ventures had failed, that I was barely scraping by in some tiny apartment in the city. In reality, my journey had been challenging, but ultimately successful beyond anything they could imagine. After several failed startups and nearly going bankrupt twice, my tech security company gained traction with a patent that revolutionized data protection for small businesses. 3 years of 18-hour workdays and ramen noodle dinners eventually led to a company valued at over $50 million. 6 months ago, a larger tech firm acquired us, making me wealthy beyond my wildest expectations. Yet I told none of this to my family. Each holiday call or rare visit home, I listened to their assumptions about my struggling lifestyle without correction. When James asked if I needed help with rent, or when Stephanie offered me her old designer clothes, I simply thanked them politely and changed the subject. It was easier than explaining why I chose to live modestly despite my success, that I valued experiences over possessions, that I was building schools in developing countries rather than buying mansions. The call about my parents came 3 weeks ago. Mom had fallen and broken her hip, and Dad's early-stage dementia was progressing faster than expected. They needed more care than they could afford on their retirement savings. James had called a family meeting to discuss options and financial responsibilities. His voice held the usual thinly veiled judgment when he asked if I could manage to come home and contribute whatever I could to their care. Now, as my flight prepared to land in the small regional airport near Cedar Springs, anxiety churned in my stomach. For years, I had maintained the emotional distance their judgment created, building a life and friendships with people who valued me for my ideas and character rather than my status. But family has a way of reducing even the most accomplished adult back to their childhood dynamics. Would this visit finally be the time I revealed the truth about my success, or would I continue to protect myself from their inevitable reactions, the shock, the awkward recalibration of our relationships, the questions about why I had kept it secret? As the plane touched down, I was still undecided. My parents needed help, and I had already arranged for the best care money could buy. But my siblings had no idea, and the family meeting promised to be another exercise in their condescension. My hands tightened around my deliberately average handbag as I prepared to step back into the complicated web of family expectations and judgments. The morning of my flight, I stood before my closet in my downtown loft, deliberately choosing the most understated items I owned. I selected faded jeans, a simple sweater with a small hole near the cuff, and comfortable sneakers that had seen better days. My assistant Margot watched with bewilderment as I packed similarly modest outfits in an old duffel bag rather than my usual sleek luggage. "You are worth $50 million, and you are dressed like a college student going home for the weekend," she observed, holding my usual itinerary folder. "And you are taking a commercial flight instead of the company jet because—" "Because this is how they expect me to arrive," I replied, tucking my hair into a simple ponytail. "They have a very specific image of who I am, and I am not ready to disrupt that quite yet." On the flight, I found myself reflecting on why I maintained this facade. The truth was complicated. Part of me enjoyed the freedom of being underestimated. In the business world, I had learned that people who underestimated me often revealed more than they intended, giving me the upper hand in negotiations. With my family, their low expectations meant I never had to justify my choices or defend my success according to their metrics. But there was a deeper reason, one I rarely admitted even to myself. Their judgment had hurt me profoundly. When I first left home, their dismissal of my dreams cut deeper than I could acknowledge. Each patronizing comment about my phase of entrepreneurship, each suggestion that I should settle down like Stephanie or get a real job like James had accumulated into a protective wall I built around my true self. "Your problem, Allison, is that you have always been impractical," my brother had said during our last family Christmas 5 years ago. "Some people are meant to lead and innovate, others are meant to follow. There is no shame in accepting your limitations." That night, I had stepped outside to hide my tears, pretending to take a call while I composed myself. The irony was that earlier that same day, I had closed a deal that expanded our company internationally. My team had celebrated with champagne while I prepared to fly home to be treated like the family disappointment. The taxi from the airport drove through the familiar streets of Cedar Springs. The downtown area had barely changed. The same hardware store, my father frequented the ice cream shop where we celebrated school achievements, the park where I had first conceived of building my own business while watching people struggle. With early smartphones, everything seemed smaller now, preserved in amber, while my world had expanded beyond recognition. When the taxi pulled up to my childhood home, I felt a pang of nostalgia mixed with apprehension. The white two-story colonial with blue shutters had a new roof but was otherwise unchanged. The maple tree I had climbed as a child still dominated the front yard, and my mother's carefully tended garden bordered the walkway. For a moment, I was 10 years old again, running up those steps with a report card or art project, seeking approval I rarely felt I received fully. I paid the driver and took a deep breath before walking up the familiar path. Before I could knock, the door swung open to reveal James dressed in a cashmere sweater and pressed slacks, even though he was supposedly relaxing at home. "Finally," he said by way of greeting, checking his expensive watch. "We expected you hours ago. Did your flight get delayed, or did you have to take the bus from the airport?" His eyes took, in my deliberately casual appearance, a small, satisfied smile playing at his lips. "Good to see you too, James," I replied, giving him a brief hug that he returned stiffly. "The flight was fine. How are Mom and Dad?" "As well as can be expected, given the circumstances." He took my duffel bag, his expression mixing pity with superiority as he noted its worn condition. "I have been here since yesterday setting everything up. Stephanie and Andrew arrive tomorrow morning. You are in your old room, of course. Nothing has changed there." As I followed him inside, he continued without pause. "You know, if you need any help with expenses while you are here, just let me know. I know taking time off must be difficult for you financially." And there it was, the first of what would undoubtedly be many reminders of my perceived financial status. I could have corrected him, mentioned that my schedule was being handled by my executive team, or that money was the least of my concerns. Instead, I simply nodded and thanked him politely, maintaining the role they had assigned me in our family drama. Dad was dozing in his recliner in the living room, thinner than I remembered, and with more gray in his hair. Mom was in the kitchen, her movements slowed by her recent surgery, but her eyes bright with pleasure at seeing me. "Allison, sweetheart," she said, reaching for a hug. "You look—" She paused, searching for something positive to say about my deliberately downplayed appearance. "Healthy. Are you eating enough on your budget? You know you can always call if you need help with groceries." "I am fine, Mom," I assured her, helping her to a chair. "Tell me about your recovery. Are the doctors happy with your progress?" As we talked about her health, I could feel James hovering, interjecting with medical terms and treatment options he had researched. He had already compiled a binder of care facilities and in-home nursing options, complete with cost breakdowns and quality ratings. His organization was impressive, but came with an underlying assumption that he would be making the decisions with minimal input from me, the struggling middle child who could barely contribute financially. "We will go through everything in detail at the meeting tomorrow," he said, closing the binder. "But I wanted you to have time to process the realities of the situation. The quality care they need is not inexpensive." His emphasis on the cost was deliberate, a subtle reminder of what he perceived as my limited ability to contribute. I nodded thoughtfully, knowing that my offshore account already held more than enough to provide my parents with the best care for the rest of their lives, with plenty left over. But tonight was not the time for revelations. I needed to understand the full extent of my siblings' attitudes before deciding how to proceed. That evening, my mother insisted on preparing a family dinner despite her limited mobility. I offered to cook instead, but James had already arranged for a meal delivery service to bring a proper dinner, his way of implying that whatever I might prepare would be inadequate. The spread was admittedly impressive: roasted chicken, garlic, mashed potatoes, fresh vegetables, and an artisan bread that my mother kept exclaiming over. "This must have cost a fortune," she said, arranging the food on her best-serving dishes. "James, you are always so generous." "It is nothing, Mom," he replied with practiced modesty. "The firm had an excellent quarter. Besides, we should enjoy these family moments while we can." The doorbell rang just as we were setting the table. Stephanie burst in with her trademark dramatic flair, her husband Andrew trailing behind, carrying multiple designer shopping bags. My sister looked like she had stepped out of a fashion magazine in her cashmere dress and pearls, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the supposed hassle of travel. "We are here," she announced, embracing our mother carefully. And we brought gifts. She proceeded to distribute packages, an expensive bottle of scotch for Dad, a silk scarf for Mom, and a leather portfolio for James. When she reached me, her smile faltered slightly. "And for you, Allison, I thought you could use this." She handed me a smaller bag containing a gift card to a mid-range clothing store. "I noticed last time you visited that your wardrobe could use some refreshing," she explained, with what she probably thought was sisterly concern. "This should help you get a few professional pieces for job interviews." "Thank you," I said, evenly pocketing the card while ignoring the implication that I needed help finding employment. "How thoughtful." "Well, we all want to see you succeed," she replied with a patronizing pat on my arm. Speaking of success, Andrew just made partner at his firm. We are celebrating by renovating the kitchen. Italian marble everywhere. Dinner conversation revolved around my siblings' achievements, James's recent promotion, Stephanie's fundraising gala that had raised thousands for the Children's Hospital, Andrew's golf tournament win at their Frenti Country Club. When the topic occasionally turned to me, it was always framed as gentle concern. "And what about you, Allison?" Stephanie asked, refilling her wine glass. "Any exciting developments in your— what is it you do again? Web design?" "Something like that," I replied vaguely, helping myself to more potatoes. "Small business solutions." "Still freelancing, then," James cut in. "I know a few people who might need basic websites. Nothing major, but it could provide some steady income, more reliable than gig work." "I appreciate that," I said, swallowing both my pride and the urge to mention that my gig work had recently been valued at $50 million. Dad, who had been relatively quiet, suddenly focused on me. "Are you still in that tiny apartment? The one with the noisy neighbors?" That apartment had been 5 years and 3 residences ago. I now owned a penthouse overlooking the city park, but they did not need to know that yet. "I have a comfortable place," I answered truthfully. "Well, comfort is relative," Stephanie laughed. "Remember when Allison thought success meant making enough to buy name-brand cereal instead of the generic stuff?" As everyone chuckled at my apparent simplicity, the conversation inevitably turned to tomorrow's purpose, our parents' care needs. The reality is, James began shifting into his executive presentation mode that Mom and Dad need more support than Medicare will cover. Their retirement savings are substantial, but not infinite, especially considering the quality of care they deserve. "We have been looking at several options," Stephanie added. "There is a wonderful assisted living community near us. Very exclusive, but we know the director. The medical amenities are top-notch," Andrew contributed, "and the social environment would be perfect for them." Throughout this discussion, I noticed how they seamlessly used "we," while occasionally glancing my way with expressions that clearly excluded me from that collective decision-making. The message was clear. They were the successful ones who would handle the important decisions and financial arrangements. I was expected to contribute what little I could, and be grateful for their generosity in not demanding more. Of course, these premium facilities come with premium costs. James continued directing this comment specifically to me, but Stephanie and I have discussed how we will handle the financial arrangements. "We want to be fair about the contributions," Stephanie added with false sweetness. "Everyone should contribute according to their means." "Which means we do not expect you to match our contributions," James clarified, as if doing me a great favor. "Whatever you can manage will be appreciated, even a token amount." I felt my cheeks burning with a mixture of anger and humiliation, not because I could not contribute, but because they had so completely written me off without ever asking about my actual situation. Years of assumptions and judgments had created a narrative about me that they accepted as absolute truth. "You have always had so much potential, Allison." My mother sighed, patting my hand. I still do not understand why you never finished that business degree. You could have been so successful like your brother. Different paths work for different people, Mom, I replied quietly. Not everyone measures success the same way. True, James nodded condescendingly. But some measures of success are more tangible than others. Security, stability, the ability to care for family, these are universal indicators that one's choices have been sound. As the subtle digs continued throughout dinner, I maintained my composure while internally debating my next move. Part of me wanted to reveal everything immediately, to see their expressions when they realized how wrong they had been about me all these years. But another part hesitated, wanting to understand the full extent of their assumptions before changing our family dynamic forever. By the time dessert was served, I had made my decision. Tomorrow's family meeting would be the moment of truth, when they would learn that their struggling middle child had been more successful than they could have imagined, just not in the ways they had prescribed. The official family meeting began promptly at 9 the next morning in our parents' living room. James had set up his laptop and a small portable projector to display his meticulously prepared PowerPoint presentation titled Parental Care Options and Financial Considerations. Stephanie and Andrew sat on the love seat, matching in their business casual attire, while our parents occupied their usual chairs. I took the slightly wobbly ottoman in the corner, the least comfortable seat, which seemed fitting for my assigned role as the family afterthought. I have compiled comprehensive research on the top care options in the region. James began clicking through slides of upscale facilities with manicured grounds and elegant interiors. These three meet our criteria for quality medical care, social engagement opportunities, and proximity to family. Each facility he presented was increasingly luxurious, with price points to match. He detailed amenities like gourmet dining options, cultural excursions, and specialized memory care programs for Dad. The final option, clearly his preferred choice, was a newly opened continuing care community with separate apartments for independent living that could transition to higher levels of care as needed. This would allow Mom and Dad to maintain their autonomy while having immediate access to medical support, he explained. They would have a 2-bedroom unit with a small garden terrace. The grounds include walking paths, a community center, and even a small golf course for Dad. It looks wonderful, Mom murmured, though I noticed the concern in her eyes as she glanced at Dad, who was struggling to follow the rapid presentation. Of course, premium care comes with premium costs, James continued, transitioning to a slide with a detailed breakdown of monthly expenses. The bottom line number caused our mother to gasp softly. This represents the gap between their retirement income and the actual costs. This is what we as a family need to address. Andrew, ever the finance professional, leaned forward. We have calculated how to distribute this responsibility equitably. Stephanie and I can cover 40%. And I can manage 45% through my bonus structure and investments, James added. That leaves 15%, which is approximately $1,200 monthly. All eyes turned to me. The unstated question hung in the air. Could I even afford to contribute my relatively small share? I remained silent, curious how they would frame their assumptions about my finances. Stephanie cleared her throat delicately. Allison, we know your situation is different from ours. If that amount is prohibitive, perhaps you could contribute in other ways. Maybe visit more often to provide personal care instead. We do not want to create hardship, James added, with the patronizing tone he reserved specially for me. Perhaps $500 monthly would be more manageable for your budget. Stephanie and I could adjust our contributions to cover the difference. How generous of you, I remarked quietly, noting how they had already decided what I could and could not afford without ever asking me directly. We just want what is best for Mom and Dad, Stephanie said, her voice carrying a hint of defensiveness. Those of us who can contribute more should do so. Dad, who had been quiet throughout the presentation, suddenly focused on me. Do you even have a steady job now, Allison? Last we talked, you were between projects. Before I could answer, James interjected. I have actually been meaning to discuss that. My company has an entry-level marketing position opening up. The salary would be modest by our standards, but for someone in Allison's position, it would provide stability and benefits. I could put in a word. That is so thoughtful, Stephanie beamed at our brother. A real job with a real company would make such a difference for you, Allison. The condescension was becoming unbearable. They had created such a complete narrative about my supposed failures that they could not even imagine I might have built something successful on my own terms. I appreciate the thought, I said carefully, but I am comfortable with my current professional situation. James exchanged a knowing look with Stephanie. Being comfortable and being secure are different things, Allison. At some point, you need to think practically. You cannot couch surf and do freelance work forever. Couch surf? I repeated, genuinely confused. Well, you mentioned having roommates last time we spoke, Stephanie said. And you never invite any of us to visit, which suggests your living situation might be temporary. I had never mentioned roommates. What I had said was that I had a house manager and personal assistant who sometimes stayed at my place, hardly the same thing. And I had never invited them because their judgment and assumptions made visits unpleasant. I do not couch surf, I stated firmly. I have a stable living situation. But not stable enough to afford reliable transportation, right? James pressed. I noticed you took a taxi from the airport instead of driving yourself. Do you even own a car these days? The conversation had veered into territory so divorced from reality that I almost wanted to laugh. Instead, I simply said, I have transportation arrangements that work for me. Allison has always been our free spirit, Mom interjected clearly, trying to smooth over the tension. Not everyone needs material success to be happy. That is a convenient philosophy when material success seems out of reach, James muttered, just loudly enough for everyone to hear. That comment was the tipping point. 10 years of condescension and judgment crystallized into a moment of perfect clarity. They were never going to see me clearly unless I forced them to confront their misconceptions. Let us get back to the main issue, Andrew suggested, oblivious to the tension. Can you manage the $500 per month, Allison? It is important we finalize the numbers today. I need to make a quick call first, I said, pulling out my phone. It will just take a minute. Now is not really the time for personal calls, James said with irritation. We are in the middle of important family business. I ignored him and dialed my assistant Margot. Hey, it is me. Is everything set for today? I paused, listening. Perfect. Go ahead with the arrival in 15 minutes. Yes, the front lawn is big enough. Thanks. I ended the call and turned back to my confused family. Sorry about that. Just confirming my transportation. Did you arrange for another taxi? We are not finished here, James said, with growing annoyance. Not exactly a taxi, I replied, settling back into my seat. Now about those care options. I actually have another facility to suggest. It opened last year, about 20 minutes from here. It has an exceptional memory care program and has been recognized nationally for its innovative approach. I researched every quality facility within 50 miles, James said dismissively. If it were worth considering, it would be in my presentation. This one is quite exclusive, I continued calmly. They only accept private clients through their foundation. No public listings. And how exactly would you know about an exclusive unlisted care facility? Stephanie asked with a laugh. I smiled slightly. I know because I funded it. The Westbrook Senior Health Foundation is my project. A confused silence fell over the room. James recovered first. What do you mean, your project? You cannot possibly be suggesting you have the resources to fund a healthcare facility. That is exactly what I am suggesting, I replied. This is ridiculous, he scoffed. Next you will tell us you own a yacht and a private island. No island, I said with a small smile. Not yet, anyway. Allison, if this is your idea of a joke, it is not funny, Stephanie said sharply. We are trying to have a serious discussion about our parents' future. I assure you, I am being completely serious, I replied. Right, James laughed derisively. The same sister who cannot even afford a car suddenly owns a healthcare foundation. Makes perfect sense. As if on cue, the distinctive sound of helicopter blades cutting through the air became audible, growing louder by the second. My family's conversation halted as the noise became impossible to ignore. What on earth? My mother exclaimed, moving toward the window. Outside, a sleek black helicopter was descending onto their spacious front lawn. The downwash from its rotors, bending the grass and shaking the branches of the maple tree. Are they allowed to do that? Stephanie asked in alarm. Should we call someone? I calmly gathered my things and stood up. No need to call anyone. That would be for me. 5 pairs of eyes stared at me in complete confusion. What do you mean for you? James demanded. What is going on, Allison? I walked to the door and turned back to face my family. I believe your exact words were that I cannot even afford a car, I said evenly. You were right. I do not own a car. I opened the door as the helicopter settled onto the lawn and its engines began to idle. The pilot, dressed in a crisp uniform, gave me a wave of recognition. My ride is here, I announced simply. My mother's face went pale before she sank slowly onto the couch in a dead faint. My father stood, frozen mouth agape. Stephanie clutched Andrew's arm so tightly her knuckles turned white, while James looked like someone had just told him the earth was flat. Before stepping out, I turned back one more time. When Mom wakes up, tell her I will be back in an hour. I think we should continue this conversation at my new place. The helicopter can take all of us. As the helicopter lifted off with me inside, I caught a glimpse of my family still standing in the doorway, their expressions a mixture of shock, confusion, and disbelief. The pilot handed me a headset to block the noise, and I sank back into the leather seat, finally allowing myself to process what had just happened. Everything all right, Miss Parker? The pilot asked. You seem tense. Just family drama, Rick, I replied, watching my childhood home grow smaller below us. You know how it goes. Yes, ma'am. Should I circle around a few times to give them something to talk about? He asked, with a hint of humor. I laughed, feeling some of the tension dissipate. Tempting, but let us head directly to the estate. We will be bringing them all back with us shortly. The helicopter banked gently toward the wooded hills outside town, where my newly purchased estate was located. I had bought the 30-acre property 6 months ago, when I decided to establish a regional office closer to my hometown. The main house was a renovated historic mansion with 10 bedrooms, modern amenities, discreetly integrated into its classic architecture. The grounds featured gardens, a small lake, and a newly built helipad. It was extravagant, certainly, but also a long-term investment in reconnecting with my roots on my own terms. Below us, I could see the estate coming into view, the sprawling main house with its stone facade, the carefully landscaped grounds, and the guest house where my staff stayed. It was beautiful, but also somewhat intimidating, which was precisely why I had hesitated to reveal its existence to my family. How could I explain that despite this outward display of wealth, I still valued simplicity and purpose over status? As we landed on the helipad, I saw Margot waiting with a tablet in hand, ready to brief me on the day's schedule. She had been with me since the early days of my company, one of the few people who knew both my professional and personal worlds intimately. "How did the grand reveal go?" she asked, as I approached, handing me a bottle of water. "About as expected," I replied. My mother fainted. The rest looked like they had seen a ghost. "We will be bringing them here in about an hour, so please make sure everything is ready." "Already done," she assured me. "Chef Thomas has prepared lunch. The West Wing guest rooms are prepared in case they stay over, and I have assembled the family portfolio, as you requested." The family portfolio contained documentation of the care arrangements I had already been quietly putting in place for my parents, the foundation I had established that operated the senior care facility, the trust fund to cover all their close medical needs, and the legal framework that would ensure they received the best possible care regardless of how family dynamics played out. "Thank you, Margot. What would I do without you?" "Probably buy another tech company out of boredom," she quipped. Speaking of which, the Tokyo team sent over the proposal for the new security protocol. They need your feedback by tomorrow. "I will review it tonight," I promised. But family comes first today, complicated as that may be. An hour later, Rick radioed that he was approaching my parents' house. I took a deep breath, preparing for the next phase of this revelation. Part of me regretted the dramatic helicopter entrance, but after years of dismissal and condescension, perhaps a dramatic gesture was exactly what was needed to break through their perceptions. When the helicopter returned, my entire family was aboard, their expressions still stunned. My mother clutched her purse like a shield, my father gazed out the window in wonder, and my siblings maintained a shocked silence that was entirely out of character for them. Only Andrew seemed to have recovered somewhat, his banker's mind likely already calculating the value of what he was seeing. As we landed, and they disembarked, the full impact of the estate came into view. Stephanie's mouth literally dropped open, while James kept blinking rapidly, as if trying to wake himself from a dream. "Welcome to my home," I said, simply leading them toward the main entrance, where Margot waited with a professional smile. "This is yours," my mother finally managed to ask as we entered the soaring foyer with its grand staircase and crystal chandelier. "Yes, Mom. I purchased it 6 months ago when I decided to establish a regional office nearby." Regional office of what James demanded, finding his voice at last. I led them into the main living room, where floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the gardens and lake beyond of Parker Security Solutions. My company. I gestured for them to sit on the plush sofas arranged around a marble coffee table. "Your company," he repeated flatly. "Since when do you have a company? And how could you possibly afford all this?" "I founded PSS 8 years ago," I explained calmly. "We specialize in cybersecurity solutions for small to mid-sized businesses. 6 months ago, we were acquired by Nexus Technologies for just over $50 million. I retained leadership of the division and significant equity in the parent company." The silence that followed was deafening. Stephanie looked like she might follow our mother's example and faint, while James had gone pale beneath his tan. $50 million, my father repeated slowly. "My Allison." "Yes, Dad," I said gently, moving to sit beside him. "Your Allison." But you never said anything," my mother stammered. "All these years we thought—" "You thought I was struggling," I finished for her. "I know. I never corrected that assumption." "Why would you let us believe you were barely getting by?" Stephanie demanded, finding her voice at last. Do you know how worried we were about you? I raised an eyebrow at her. Were you worried, Stephanie? Or was it more comfortable to believe I had failed? You gave me a gift card for job interview clothes yesterday. She had the grace to blush. I was trying to help. No, I said firmly. You were trying to reinforce the narrative that made sense to you, that the sister who chose a different path must necessarily be struggling. It never occurred to any of you that I might succeed on my own terms. You could have told us, James said, a hint of anger in his voice. Instead, you let us make fools of ourselves. I did not create your assumptions, I replied evenly. You did that all on your own. Every time I tried to talk about my work, you changed the subject or dismissed it as that computer thing Allison does. You never asked genuine questions about my business or my life. But the old clothes, the taxi from the airport, my mother began. Were choices, I finished. I live simply by preference, not necessity. I drive a 10-year-old car when I drive at all because I prefer it. I took a taxi because I flew commercial to maintain my privacy a bit longer. None of that means I cannot afford better. It means material displays are not how I measure success. Andrew, ever practical, spoke up for the first time. So that care facility you mentioned, the Westbrook Foundation, that really is yours. I nodded and gestured to Margot, who brought over the family portfolio and handed it to me. Yes. After my first major round of funding 3 years ago, I established the foundation. It operates an innovative care community, specializing in memory support and holistic elder care. I had already arranged for Mom and Dad to have a place there whenever they need it. I opened the portfolio and began showing them the documentation, the trust established in our parents' names, the healthcare provisions, the legal framework that would protect their future regardless of any family disagreements. You did all this without telling us, James asked, his voice a mixture of awe and residual anger. I did all this because I love them, I corrected, and yes, without telling you because I knew what would happen. You would question my decisions, try to take control of the process, and ultimately make me prove myself worthy of having a say in our parents' care. Today's meeting confirmed exactly that. My mother wiped away tears. We never meant to make you feel that way, Allison. Perhaps not intentionally, I acknowledged. But every gift card for basic necessities, every offer of an entry-level job at James's company, every condescending remark about my potential sent the same message, that you believed I had failed and needed rescue. We were trying to help, Stephanie insisted. Were you, or were you, trying to validate your own choices by casting mine as the cautionary tale, the family screw-up, who could not succeed without following your prescribed path? My words hung in the air, uncomfortable but true. For the first time, my siblings seemed to be genuinely reflecting on their behavior rather than defending it. My father reached over and took my hand, his eyes clearer than they had been all weekend. I always knew you were special, Allison. Different, yes, but special. I just did not understand what you were building. Thank you, Dad, I said softly, squeezing his hand. That means a lot. Margot discreetly signaled that lunch was ready, and I invited everyone to move to the dining room. As we settled around the table set with fine china and fresh flowers, the initial shock began to give way to curiosity. My mother wanted to know about my home in the city, Stephanie asked about my travels, and even James began to ask more substantive questions about how I had built my company. For the first time in years, they were seeing me, really seeing me, not as the failing middle child, but as a successful woman who had created something significant on her own terms. The helicopter had gotten their attention, but it was this moment of genuine interest in my life that felt like the true revelation. After lunch, I gave my family a tour of the estate. The property included the main houseguest cottages and a newly constructed office building where a small team would soon be working on regional projects. As we walked the grounds, the initial tension gradually dissolved into a more complex mixture of emotions: lingering embarrassment from my siblings, pride from my parents, and my own sense of relief at finally being authentic with my Kling family. In the garden overlooking the lake, we settled onto patio furniture for coffee and continued conversation. The questions came more naturally now, with genuine curiosity replacing judgment. "When did you know your company would be successful?" my father asked, his eyes more focused than they had been all weekend. Despite his cognitive challenges, his interest in my work seemed to anchor him in the present moment. "There was not a single moment," I explained. "We nearly went bankrupt twice in the first 3 years. I lived in a studio apartment with a leaking ceiling and worked 18-hour days. But the third year, we patented a security protocol that changed everything." "Why did you not ask for help during those hard times?" my mother wondered. "We would have helped you." "With conditions," I said gently. Every offer of help came with the expectation that I would admit my path was a mistake. I needed to prove to myself that it was not. James, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke up. "I owe you an apology, Allison. I made assumptions about your choices that said more about my own insecurities than your capabilities." The admission startled me. My brother rarely acknowledged being wrong about anything. "What do you mean, your insecurities?" I asked. He sighed, setting down his coffee cup. "I followed the path that was expected of me. Ivy League corporate ladder country club membership. I did everything right, according to our family's definition of success." He paused, looking out over the lake. "And I hate at least 60% of my daily life." "James," my mother exclaimed, "you never said anything." "Because admitting dissatisfaction would mean admitting I might have chosen wrong," he explained. "So when Allison chose a completely different path, I needed her to fail to validate my choices. Her success challenges the narrative I built my life around." His honesty created an opening for Stephanie, who had been fidgeting with her wedding ring. "I feel the same way," she admitted quietly. "My life looks perfect on Instagram, but Andrew and I have been in couples counseling for the past year. All those charity galas and country club events feel empty sometimes." Andrew nodded in agreement, taking her hand supportively. "We have been reassessing what really matters to us. The big house and social status came with costs we did not anticipate." This vulnerability from my siblings was unexpected and deeply moving. For years I had imagined them as perfectly content with their conventional success, judging me from positions of smug superiority. The reality that they too had doubts and regrets created a new possibility for authentic connection. "Why did you keep your success secret for so long?" my father asked. "Were you punishing us for not believing in you?" The question stung with its accuracy. Part of me had enjoyed the fantasy of a dramatic revelation that would force them to recognize how wrong they had been about me. But the reality of seeing their shock and hurt had been less satisfying than I had imagined. Initially, I kept quiet because I was not sure the success would last, I admitted. Later, it became a habit, a form of protection. And yes, maybe there was an element of wanting to prove everyone wrong in a dramatic way. That was petty of me, and I regret it now. "The helicopter entrance was a bit extra," Stephanie said with a small smile, using her favorite slang term. I laughed, acknowledging the truth in her observation. "Not my most mature moment," I conceded. But after James's comment about not even affording a car, something in me just snapped. I deserved that he admitted, though Mom fainting was concerning. "I was overwhelmed," our mother defended herself. Finding out your daughter is a millionaire tends to come as a shock. Multimillionaire Andrew corrected automatically, then looked embarrassed when we all turned to him. Sorry, Banker Habit. The conversation shifted to my parents' care, this time with me fully included in the discussion. I explained the Westbrook Foundation's approach to elder care, particularly for dementia patients like my father. Rather than the institutional model James had researched, Westbrook offered a community of small home-like residences with personalized care plans and an emphasis on maintaining dignity and independence as long as possible. The foundation has already established a trust to cover all expenses, I explained, addressing the financial concerns that had dominated the earlier meeting. But this is not about me taking control of the decisions. It is about all of us finding the best solution together as equals. Equals, James repeated thoughtfully. That is going to take some adjustment in my thinking. Mine too, I acknowledged. I have been defining myself in opposition to all of you for so long. I am not sure I know how to be just a sister and daughter without that edge of resentment. As the afternoon progressed, we began rebuilding our family dynamic on this new foundation of honesty. The process was awkward at times, with old habits of interaction reasserting themselves, but the willingness to try was evident on all sides. My parents watched their adult children with a mixture of concern and hope, occasionally contributing memories from our childhood that highlighted moments of connection we had forgotten. When evening approached, I invited everyone to stay over in the guest rooms, an offer they accepted with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Stephanie was clearly excited to experience the luxury accommodations, while James seemed relieved not to have to process everything that had happened while driving back to the city. My parents were simply happy to have all their children under one roof, a rare occurrence in recent years. Over dinner, prepared by my personal chef, we continued building bridges across the years of misunderstanding. There were difficult moments. Stephanie's hurt over not being included in my real life, James's lingering defensiveness about his career choices, my parents' regret at not supporting my entrepreneurial path more fully. But there were also moments of genuine connection, and even laughter as we shared stories from our separate lives. So, you really flew to Tokyo for a day just to meet with investors? Stephanie asked incredulously. I cannot imagine having that kind of freedom. It was not as glamorous as it sounds, I assured her. I was so jet-lagged I put salt in my coffee instead of sugar and nearly fell asleep during the presentation. Still, she sighed. Your life sounds exciting. Parts of it are, I acknowledged. Other parts are ordinary and sometimes lonely. Success created opportunities, but also isolation. There are trade-offs to every choice. I think that is what I am finally starting to understand, James said thoughtfully. There is no perfect path that guarantees happiness. We all just do our best with the choices we make. As we finished dinner and moved to the living room for dessert, I realized something profound had shifted in our family dynamic. The hierarchies and judgments that had defined our relationships for so long were not gone entirely, but they had been fundamentally disrupted. In their place was something tentative but promising, a more authentic connection based on who we really were rather than who we pretended to be. When my mother accidentally knocked over her coffee cup, staining the expensive carpet, her immediate distress revealed how much she still saw herself as a visitor in my world rather than family. I am so sorry, she gasped. That rug probably costs more than our car. It is just a rug, Mom, I said gently. Things can be replaced. This conversation, this honest connection we are building, that is what matters. Later, as everyone retired to their rooms for the night, I stood on the terrace looking out at the moonlight, reflecting on the lake. James joined me, offering a glass of whiskey from my collection. You have done well for yourself, little sister, he said with genuine admiration. Not just the money and all this, he gestured at the estate, but building something meaningful on your own terms. That takes courage. I am not sure I have. It is never too late to make changes, I told him. If you hate 40% of your life, that is actually not terrible odds. But you could aim higher. He laughed softly. Always the optimist. Some things never change. Some things should not, I agreed, clinking my glass against his in a quiet toast to new beginnings. The next morning, sunshine streamed through the windows of the estate's breakfast room as my family gathered around the table. Chef Thomas had outdone himself with a spread of fresh pastries, fruit gourmet omelets, and perfectly brewed coffee. The conversation flowed more naturally now, with less tension and more genuine interest. I still cannot believe you funded an entire care facility, my mother said, adding cream to her coffee. How did you even know what was needed? Research, I explained. After Dad's diagnosis, I dove into learning everything I could about progressive memory care. The traditional options seemed so institutional and impersonal. I wanted to create something that preserved dignity and joy, not just safety. That is what impressed me most during yesterday's tour, James admitted. The attention to design details that support memory patients without looking clinical. The residents seemed genuinely happy. That was the goal, I nodded. When residents moved in, we interviewed their families about their life histories, preferences, even the small daily rituals that made them feel at home. The architecture and programs were built around those human needs, not just efficiency. Would it be possible for me to volunteer there sometimes? Stephanie asked hesitantly. My charity work has felt increasingly superficial lately. This seems like somewhere I could make a real difference. They would love that, I said, genuinely touched by her interest. They have an arts program that could use someone with your eye for design. The conversation shifted to more practical matters. The timeline for our parents' potential move to the facility, the legal arrangements, and how we would stay connected as a family through the transition. For the first time, we were discussing these issues as equal partners, each contributing our different strengths to the solution. After breakfast, we moved to the garden for a family photo, the first in many years where the smiles felt genuine rather than performed. As we arranged ourselves on the terrace steps, I found myself reflecting on how dramatically our family dynamic had changed in just 48 hours. Before you return home, there is something I want to share with all of you, I said, once we were settled in the living room again. My success has been meaningful professionally, but it has come with personal costs I am only now beginning to address. What do you mean, dear? My mother asked with concern. I have spent 10 years defining myself in opposition to this family, I explained. Working to prove you wrong became such a driving force that I sometimes lost sight of what I actually wanted for myself beyond that validation. Building walls to protect myself from judgment also kept me isolated from genuine connection. I think we all played a part in that dynamic, my father said with unexpected clarity. Family systems are complicated. Everyone contributes to the patterns. Exactly, I agreed, surprised and touched by his insight. Which is why healing needs to involve all of us. I am planning to stay in this area part-time now, splitting my time between here and the city. I want us to rebuild our relationships not based on who we thought each other was, but who we actually are. I would like that very much, my mother said, reaching for my hand. To get to know the real Allison, not just the version we imagined. And I want to know the real versions of all of you too, I added. Not just the roles we fell into over the years. James cleared his throat. Speaking of authentic selves, I have been thinking about making some changes. I have been offered a teaching position at the business school, less money, but more meaningful work. After seeing what you have built, Allison, I am inspired to stop doing what is expected and start doing what matters. That sounds perfect for you, I said sincerely. You always were a natural teacher. Stephanie shared her own tentative plans for shifting her social energy from status-oriented charity galas to more hands-on community work, while Andrew mentioned his interest in ethical investment counseling for nonprofits. My parents listened with evident pride as their adult children spoke about aligning their lives more closely with their values. As the weekend drew to a close and preparations were made for everyone's departure, I felt a profound sense of peace. The helicopter that had caused such drama was now just one transportation option among many, no longer a symbol of division, but simply a convenient way to take my parents home. "Will you come for Sunday dinner next week?" my mother asked as we said our goodbyes. "Nothing fancy, just family." "I would love that," I replied, embracing her warmly. "Just family sounds perfect." After everyone had gone, I walked through the quiet house, reflecting on the weekend's events. The revelation of my success had created an opening for something more valuable than recognition or vindication. The possibility of authentic connection with the people who had known me longest. True wealth, I realized, was not measured in helicopter rides or estate homes, but in relationships where you could be fully yourself and still be loved. For years I had pursued external success while keeping my heart protected behind walls of secrecy and resentment. The real challenge now was learning to be vulnerable, to risk being known fully by the people who had once misunderstood me so completely. As I settled on the terrace with my laptop to review the Tokyo proposal, Margot had mentioned I felt lighter than I had in years. The complicated family dynamics were not magically resolved, and there would undoubtedly be setbacks and old patterns reasserting themselves in the months ahead. But a fundamental shift had occurred, creating space for new possibilities in our relationships. The sun was setting over the lake, casting golden light across the water. In that moment, I felt immense gratitude. Not for the material success that had allowed me to make a dramatic entrance via helicopter, but for the courage to finally be authentic with the people who mattered most. That was the true victory, far more meaningful than proving anyone wrong. I wonder how many of you have had similar experiences with your families. Have you ever been underestimated or had to prove yourself to loved ones? Drop a comment below to share your story. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more real-life experiences. And remember to share this video with someone who might need to hear that success comes in many different forms. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, true wealth lies in authentic connections, not material possessions.